Hi there, thanks for joining me. This film is part of a series of 8 short films which are made from videos that I used in the course of research for writing my book Retreat. And this film is about psychology or psychoanalysis or psychotherapy and all those various related disciplines. Someone who I almost felt embarrassed to be talking about so much in the course of my book was Carl Gustav Jung. On the first case, Jung has an obvious presence in the popular culture of the time. He's there on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's, and he's quoted and talked about by singers like Van Morrison. But he obviously dates quite a long way back, before the counterculture. So from that perspective, it seems a little bit strange to be talking about him so much. I think it's Stanislav Grof who really nails the issue when he says that the environment and the culture and specifically the states of mind which people began to experience through the use of LSD suddenly made Jung's ideas seem extremely relevant, and so it really sort of dragged him into the debate. Although he himself was strongly against the use of psychedelic drugs on the basis of his own experiences of witnessing people in those states. The first clip I've got here is describing, which has a sort of is a nice sort of widescreen view of Jung, and talking briefly about why he believed in the importance of dealing with issues related to the mind.
In 1957, aged 82, Jung gave his first film interview. His thoughts touch upon universal questions, from love, marriage and relationships to international hostilities. Characteristically, Jung expressed his political thoughts in terms of the psyche.
Nowadays, particularly, the world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. We are the great danger. The psyche is the great danger. What if something goes wrong with the psyche? You see?
Not only were Jung's ideas particularly current because of the way that LSD changed the culture, he was also showed a very early interest in ideas of Eastern philosophy. He wrote the introduction to 3 very important books which brought the ideas of the East to the Western audience, to the I Ching, to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and to the Secret of the Golden Flower. Jung was particularly interested in the Hindu concept of Kundalini, which describes how the ego dissolves into the self. In this short clip, he relates that to the collective unconscious by describing a situation in therapy where a young woman he had seen was referred to the concept of the snake coiled up in her spine, even though she knew nothing about Hindu thought.
Once I told you that case of that intuitive girl, who suddenly came out with the statement that she had a black snake in the belly. Well, now that is a collective symbol. That is not an individual fantasy. That is a collective fantasy. That is well known in India. For instance, she has nothing to do with India, but we have it too. It was generally human. But it's entirely unknown. So that I, even the first moment, thought perhaps she's crazy. But she was only highly intuitive. It is in India known. It is the basis of a whole philosophical system of Tantrism. This is Kundalini. Kundalini serpent. I see. You see, and that is something known to some few specialists. Generally, it's not known that we have a serpent in the abdomen.
The following clip is particularly interesting, I think, against the background of the counterculture and that kind of explosion into the cultural mainstream of the unconscious. It describes the Fastnacht festival in Basel, which perhaps not coincidentally was where Albert Hofmann, in the potential movements era. And if you take seriously the connections between Jung and Joseph Campbell's ideas, which are the same, and the influence of them on George Lucas, you can definitely see concepts like the Force as being popular descriptions of what Jung would call the self or the psyche. More from this documentary. The first describing Jung's relationship to Alcoholics Anonymous and the influence he had on Bill W. And which obviously relates to LSD and the use of LSD in therapy and Bill W.'s use of LSD, etc. And the second, which is regards the embodiment or the human embodiment of these archetypal concepts. And this I particularly like because a colleague of mine has worked with Paul McCartney, and McCartney frequently, when describing himself in his work, he will say, can you make him look a bit bigger? And obviously referring to himself in the third person. And if you see this clip which talks about Marilyn Monroe, you'll see how that relates to that.
The patients who came to consult Jung at his house in Kusnacht varied widely, from American heiresses and the German writer Hermann Hesse to the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Jeffrey Satinover.
Basically, the motive for starting Alcoholics Anonymous came out of a patient of Jung's experience. And Jung's communicating to that patient the idea that essentially he was not going to ever successfully get over his alcoholism if he did not find God.
The official history of Alcoholics Anonymous traces the group's origins to Jung's diagnosis of the incurable alcoholic known only as Roland H.
His craving for alcohol was the equivalent on a low level of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God.
What people seek in addictive experience is something which in and of itself is normal. That is to say, the craving is normal. The craving for certain kinds of elation, for a certain sense of specialness, for heroism, for cessation of pain, and underlying all of those really, ultimately and most powerful, is the seeking of a sense of meaningfulness.
Jung observed the unchanging human need for archetypal experiences. Today, the gods have vanished, and we seek ecstasy and meaning in wealth and power, drugs and alcohol, or the lives of the famous. We project our fantasies onto public figures, political leaders, royalty, sporting heroes, musicians and movie stars.
The collective unconscious is too big to live out personally. It's like asking someone to cope with the 100,000-volt power in a high-tension line through the 110-volt wiring of the house to live out the collective unconscious himself. Much of it has to be lived by projection.
I think there's no question that the person involved can get quite confused with the archetypal image that's being portrayed, and that can confuse people on both sides of the screen, so to speak. Well, the famous example is Marilyn Monroe, and in The Dream, which she apparently reported to someone and was written down, she was standing naked in a church, and all kinds of people were coming in and worshiping her there. And, of course, simply said, this is the love goddess, but in its religious aspect. It seems to me that her education and her consciousness and the amount of security she had in her early background didn't give her a strong enough ego or a strong enough personality to stand up to an archetypal image like that and criticize it and say, well, it's as if in some way my image is terribly important to people and has religious significance, and no wonder there's so little goddess in our culture. No wonder they would use me in this way. And I think there the person gets swallowed by the image.
The Beat generation of the counterculture were particularly interested in ideas of psychoanalysis, so particularly Freud and Reich. However, in the intervening years, we start to see forms of therapy which you almost grow up beside the counterculture and in many ways have extremely strong connections to the counterculture, namely Gestalt therapy, transactional analysis and primal scream therapy. And so we're going to have a little bit on the transactional analysis and primal scream therapy, because we look at Gestalt therapy briefly in another clip that I've done on the culture of Esalen. This is a clip which shows Dr. Eric Byrne, who was the pioneer of transactional analysis, describing what that means. Now, games, the concept of games was the big kind of buzzword that was used by the hippie culture to describe people's relations. So it was the man wants you to play his games was the kind of the thing that they might say, for instance.
Eric Byrne has made Carmel his base for the development of transactional analysis. Although he commutes to San Francisco each week to maintain a practice there, he returns to Carmel each weekend to enjoy the peace of this rugged coast with its boiling ocean and capricious fog.
I haven't asked you up till now, but you call this transactional analysis. Just what exactly is a transaction?
A transaction is what I guess other people might call an interaction. But to me, interaction is sort of a non-committal word. It means that the person is just watching and isn't going to commit himself to anything. When you say transaction, you're committing yourself to the idea that people talk to each other because they're getting something out of it. And so we can move immediately on to the question of what are they getting out of it. Very simple example, if two people say hello to each other, we assume they're saying it for a good reason and that they're each getting something out of it, or they wouldn't bother to do it. And that hello is a very simple transaction, like you say hello to me and I answer hello. And it's very deceptive because although it's simple, it's a very important transaction, as you can find out by not answering somebody if they say hello to you, and you get yourself into real trouble because it is actually a very important transaction. You say hello for somebody to answer you.
You're also listening to how hearty they are when they're saying hello.
Right. And if somebody says hello enthusiastically and you don't answer very enthusiastically, then they feel cheated. It's almost as though they had a kind of a little machine or cash register in their head that was figuring out how much hello you said and how much they owe you back. So that's why we call it a transaction, is because if A says something and B answers, then they're both getting something out of it, or they wouldn't bother to say it. In other words, the basic question of all social interchanges between people is, why do people talk to each other? Why do they bother to?
I'm not a massive fan of primal scream therapy, the concept, but obviously it's indivisible from that era, and it's definitely one of those countercultural therapeutic ideas. Obviously, thanks in large part to the impact of John Lennon and the Plastic Ono album. So here's a couple of clips. The first is actually I think for a telephone recording of an interview with Lennon, and I think it's funny how he's obviously putting a bit of water between himself and Janov. So I think I get a bit of sly pleasure from that. And the second is from a debate on mental illness between a panel including the psychotherapist Albert Ellis and, from my point of view, very interestingly, Thomas Ezaz, who is basically one of the pioneers of the idea of the myth of mental illness, which was the big sort of rallying card for the anti-psychiatrists. And here they talk about primal screen therapy and really stick the knife in something proper.
You said that this would be the first Primal album.
When did I say that? Yes, well, I don't know.
Have you gone off that?
No, I haven't gone off. It's just like Primal was like another mirror, you know. You know, like writers take themselves to Singapore to get the atmosphere. So wherever I am, you know. So in that way, it's a Primal album. But it's like it's George's the first Gita album.
By Dr. Arthur Janoff.
Primal scream therapy means the asinine follow-up to the Freudian hypothesis that your mother and experiences during your childhood made you ill when it didn't. You listened to your nutty mother and made yourself disturbed and are carrying it on. And if you wail and cry and scream and indulge yourself in that, you get this primal pain which he invented and which he hypnotically suggests to his stupid clients. You get rid of that and you get better. Everybody I've ever seen who has gone through primal therapy and it took, and a lot of people fortunately escape, is much crazier and more self-indulgent and a bigger screwball than he or she ever was before. Alas.
I take it Dr. Ellis is not fairly disposed. Dr. Zaz, your comments on primal scream therapy as developed by Dr. Janoff?
Well, up until the last 3 or 4 sentences of what Dr. Ellis said, I was in agreement. I would not agree with overstatements at the end. I think it's, as I said before, chacun a son goût. It's a piece of nonsense. But if those who believe it like it, it is like any other religion. If you don't believe it, it's nonsense. If you believe it, it works. I don't think it is simply our business to judge it. Insofar as it's done between consenting adults, I look upon it like sex. Doesn't make it... Because I think, I like to re-emphasize this, I think that what is wrong, is something fundamentally wrong about authorities, especially in mental health, psychology, psychiatry, not declining the job of judging it. We should say it's not our business to judge it. More power to them. Let them scream.
So I hope you enjoyed that short clip, and do please check out the other 7 clips in the playlist. And if you're so inclined, buy yourself a copy of my book Retreat, and there'll be a description in the description below where you can buy it on Amazon.